We've all been there, right? A conversation that just completely goes off the rails. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden barriers that cause these communication meltdowns, and more importantly, give you the tools to smash right through them.
Seriously, haven't we all been there? You craft what you think is the perfect email, where you give what seem like the simplest instructions, and what you get back is just total confusion. It's so frustrating, right? And it always leaves you wondering, wait, what did I do wrong here?
Well, here's the good news. It's probably not just you. These mix-ups aren't just random accidents or bad luck. They're caused by very specific, very real barriers. And the moment you can actually put a name to them, that's when you can start taking them apart. So let's start with the most common culprit, the words themselves.
Okay, so our first major category of barriers has everything to do with the basic tools we use to communicate. Our language and all that cultural programming that runs in the background.
So first up, semantic barriers. This is basically when the language itself is the problem. You see this all the time when words have like double meanings, or when we fall back on slang or corporate jargon that not everyone in the room actually gets.
Oh, here's a classic example. You've probably heard this one. Someone in a meeting says, "We need to leverage synergy," probably because it sounds super important and strategic. But what does that actually mean? It just means, hey, we need to work together more. See? Using simple, plain language just slices right through that kind of fog.
So how do you fix this? It's actually pretty straightforward. First off, just use simple, clear language. Next, ditch the jargon unless you are 100% sure everybody knows what you're talking about. And if you use a word that could be a little fuzzy, take a second to clarify it. And maybe the most important thing of all, make it okay for people to ask, hey, what does that word mean? That should be seen as a smart move, not a dumb question.
Okay, next up, we've got cultural barriers. This is a big one. It's all about realizing that those unspoken rules we all follow for communication, yeah, they are not the same everywhere. What's perfectly polite in one place could be seen as super rude somewhere else.
Just think about this for a second. The simple act of looking someone in the eye. In some cultures, that's a sign of honesty and confidence, but in others, it can come off as aggressive or disrespectful. Total opposites. It's a really powerful reminder that our normal isn't everyone's normal.
So how do you navigate this? Well, the biggest thing is just awareness. Try to learn a little bit about the backgrounds of the people you're communicating with. Definitely avoid those lazy stereotypes, and, just be willing to be flexible and adapt your style a bit. It goes a long way. It shows respect, and that alone opens the door for much clearer communication. But, sometimes the biggest barriers aren't out there in the world. They're actually inside our own heads.
All right, let's shift gears now. We're moving away from external factors and looking inward at the psychological barriers that get in our way.
So psychological barriers, these are all about how our own mental or emotional state acts like a filter on everything we hear and say. Think about it. When you're stressed out or anxious or maybe holding on to some kind of bias, you don't really hear what's being said. You hear what your emotions are telling you is being said. Big difference.
And this scenario is just so relatable. Picture this. A manager gives some really thoughtful, constructive feedback, trying to help an employee grow. But because that employee is already feeling anxious about their performance, they don't hear the constructive part at all. All they hear is criticism. And just like that, the conversation is over. They've shut down.
The way through this is all about managing the emotional climate of the conversation. You have to build trust. You have to practice empathy. And sometimes you just have to acknowledge that, yeah, feelings are involved here. Doing that creates a kind of psychological safety net, which makes it possible for messages to actually land the way they were intended.
Okay, for our last section, we're zooming back out to look at the barriers in our physical environment and even in the systems and structures we work in every day.
Let's start with physical barriers. These are probably the most obvious ones. We're talking about literal noise, like a construction site outside your window or a terrible phone connection. It can even be a physiological issue, like a hearing impairment that just makes it hard for the message to get through cleanly.
Oh man, I think every single one of us has lived through this exact moment. You're on a super important video call, the other person gets to the most crucial piece of information and boom, the screen freezes. That right there is a physical barrier in action, and it can completely torpedo a conversation.
The good news is the fixes for these are often pretty practical. Try to control your environment. Find a quiet spot. Use technology that you can actually count on. And always close the loop. Just a quick, hey, did you catch that? Can save you a world of trouble, especially if you think there might have been a disruption.
And that brings us to our final type, systemic barriers. These are the ones created by the very structure of an organization. Its hierarchy, its rules, its power dynamics. When you have a really rigid hierarchy or a culture where people are afraid to speak up to their boss, vital information just stops flowing.
And this example really shows you how high the stakes can get with this stuff. If the system makes people too scared to report things up the chain of command, it isn't just inefficient, it can be genuinely dangerous. Fear is an incredibly powerful communication blocker.
Now, breaking these systemic barriers down, that's really a leadership challenge. It's about being intentional about creating channels where feedback is not just accepted, but it's safe and actively encouraged. It's about where you can, flattening that structure so that great ideas and critical warnings can travel freely, no matter who they come from.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, right? We've talked about barriers in our language, our culture, our own psychology, and even our physical environment. So what's the one thread, the one master key that ties all of these solutions together?
It really boils down to this one simple idea. The master key to unlocking better communication is first, being aware that these barriers exist, and second, being willing to adapt your approach on the fly. It's about taking that extra half second to pause and think, who am I talking to? What's the situation here? And what's the best way for me to shape this message so it actually connects?
Just by being able to name these barriers, you've already taken the most important first step. The next step, of course, is to do something about it. So I want you to think about your own life, at work, at home, in your relationships. Which one of these barriers do you see popping up the most? And what is one small thing you can do, maybe even today, to start chipping away at it?